My mom laughed when my sister called me 35 and still single in front of our entire family at Thanksgiving dinner. They thought I was the quiet failure, the spinster living in a small studio apartment while my sister showed off her designer bags and country club lifestyle. But as their cruel laughter faded, I calmly reached into my bag and set a leather binder on the dining table. I looked my mother right in the eye and said, "I've been married for 3 years to the majority shareholder of the bank that's foreclosing on your house on Monday." The silence that fell over the room was deafening. My sister's smirk completely vanished, and my mother turned ghost white. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." My name is Clara, and I'm 28 years old. But if you ask my family, they'd probably tell you I was a ghost. Or worse, a mistake. For as long as I can remember, I was the invisible daughter, the one who sat quietly in the background while my older sister, Vanessa, soaked up every bit of spotlight our mother, Evelyn, had to offer. Vanessa was the golden child. Everything she did was celebrated like a national achievement, from getting her driver's license to marrying a man who claimed to run a high-flying investment firm. My mother practically worshipped the ground Vanessa walked on, constantly boasting to neighbors about Vanessa's designer bags, luxury vacations, and country club lifestyle. And then there was me. I worked as an independent financial consultant, kept a low profile, and lived in a modest city apartment. Because I didn't drive a brand new sports car or wear diamond-encrusted watches, my family automatically assumed I was struggling. They mistook my privacy for desperation and my silence for weakness. To them, I was just poor, plain Clara, a disappointment who hadn't managed to land a rich man or build a life worth bragging about. I never bothered to correct them. Honestly, it was easier to let them believe whatever lie made them feel superior. But what my mother and sister never realized was that while they were busy looking down on me, I was watching every single move they made. The trap was set on Thanksgiving afternoon, right around the time my mother brought out her silver dinnerware. The entire family was seated around the oversized dining table, a table funded by years of credit card debt my mother conveniently chose to ignore. Vanessa was holding court, waving her manicured hand as she detailed her latest 3-week trip to Aspen. My mother listened with starry-eyed adoration, chiming in to praise Vanessa's husband for being such a generous, high-earning provider. Then, inevitably, my mother's cold eyes turned to the end of the table, where I sat quietly, passing the mashed potatoes. "It really is a blessing to have a husband who takes care of everything," my mother said, her tone dripping with intentional pity. "Not everyone is so lucky, right, Clara? Some people just wait too long." Vanessa smirked across the table, leaning forward as if to deliver a playful secret. "Oh, leave her alone, Mom. Clara's just committed to her career, even if she is 35 and still single." I was 28. But accuracy didn't matter to Vanessa when a cruel insult could land so effectively. My mother didn't just smile. She threw her head back and laughed. A sharp, mocking sound that echoed through the dining room, inviting the rest of the table to join in on my humiliation. Vanessa beamed, proud of her little punchline. They thought they had backed me into a corner, expecting me to blush, stammer, or tear up like I used to when I was younger. I didn't flinch. I didn't shrink back, and I certainly didn't cry. Instead, I calmly wiped my hands on my napkin, set it on the table, and leaned forward. The room grew still as everyone waited for my meek apology. They expected the quiet, insecure Clara they had spent years belittling. They had no idea that the woman sitting before them was someone entirely different. 3 years ago, my life changed completely when I met Julian. He was brilliant, grounded, and fiercely protective. He was also the majority shareholder of one of the largest private equity firms in the country, a man who preferred tailored suits without flashy logos and drove a modest vehicle despite having a net worth that could buy my family's entire neighborhood 10 times over. When Julian and I got married in a quiet, private ceremony on the coast, we made a conscious decision to keep our marriage completely secret from my family. Julian knew how toxic my mother and sister were. He saw how they treated me like an outsider, and he supported my decision to test them. I wanted to see who they truly were when they thought I had nothing to offer. For 3 long years, I endured their patronizing comments, their snubbed invitations, and their endless arrogance, all while building a solid, unbreakable life with a man who loved me for who I was, not what I possessed. As Vanessa's smirk lingered across the table and my mother's cruel laughter finally died down, I realized the test was officially over. They had dug their own grave with their arrogance, and it was time for them to lie in it. I opened my designer tote bag, pulled out a thick leather binder, and laid it gently beside my plate. The dark leather folder hit the table with a soft, heavy thud. My mother frowned, her condescending smile fading into confusion. "What is that, Clara?" "Your apartment lease." "No, Mom," I said smoothly, unzipping the folder. "I've been married for 3 years to Julian Vance, the majority shareholder of Apex National Bank." Vanessa let out a sharp, nervous laugh. "Julian Vance? As if. He's a billionaire, Clara. Stop making a fool of yourself." "I'm not making a fool of myself, Vanessa," I replied, pulling out the first document. "I'm handing you reality." I slid the official marriage certificate across the polished wood, followed by a sheaf of legal notices. My sister's face turned bright red as her eyes scanned the raised seal and Julian's signature. Beside her, my mother reached for her reading glasses, her hands beginning to tremble. "And while we're clearing up misconceptions," I continued, leaning in, "Julian's firm recently acquired the bad debt portfolio from your husband's failing business, Vanessa. He's completely bankrupt." Vanessa gasped, looking toward her husband, who suddenly couldn't look anyone in the eye. "As for this house, Mom," I added, tapping the final document in front of my mother, "you refinanced it 3 times to fund Vanessa's lavish lifestyle. The bank is foreclosing on Monday, and my husband happens to own that bank." The color drained entirely from my mother's face. The silence that fell over the room was so thick, you could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. The arrogance that had filled the room just moments ago completely evaporated, replaced by raw panic. My mother's hands shook so violently that the reading glasses slipped from her fingers, clattering onto her china plate. "Clara, sweetheart," my mother stammered, her voice dropping the sharp, mocking edge it had carried for years. She reached across the table, her face desperate. "You're joking, right? We're family. You can't let them take my home. You have to tell Julian to stop this." "Family?" I asked, raising an eyebrow as I slid the documents back into my binder. "Was it family love when you laughed at me 2 minutes ago? Or was it family love when you tried to secretly alter Dad's trust fund 6 years ago, so every penny went to Vanessa instead of me?" Vanessa's jaw dropped. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but no sound came out. Her husband slumped in his chair, head buried in his hands, completely unable to deny the truth. "I know about the trust, Mom," I continued, my voice calm and unwavering. "I knew back then, and I know now. You spent decades treating me like dirt while throwing away everything on a lifestyle you couldn't afford just to keep up appearances." My mother burst into sudden, frantic tears, begging me to use Julian's influence to erase their debts. But there was no guilt left in me. Only the cold, liberating feeling of setting boundaries that should have been built years ago. I stood up from the dining table, zipped my leather binder closed, and walked out of my mother's house without looking back. Behind me, the muffled sounds of frantic shouting and sobbing dissolved into the quiet night air. For the first time in 28 years, I felt completely weightless. The consequences of their choices unfolded rapidly over the next few months. Julian made no special interventions, nor did I ask him to. The law simply took its natural course. On Monday morning, the bank initiated the official foreclosure proceedings on my mother's house. Unable to secure a loan or borrow against assets she no longer possessed, my mother was forced to sell off her antique furniture and downsize into a tiny, one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. Vanessa's picture-perfect life collapsed just as quickly. Once the true extent of her husband's crippling business debts became public, the country club social circles they had sacrificed everything to belong to completely cut them off. Facing severe financial strain and the humiliation of losing their grand facade, Vanessa and her husband filed for divorce by the end of the year. Meanwhile, Julian and I continued building our life together on a foundation of trust, humility, and genuine respect. We used our resources to quietly fund educational scholarships and financial literacy programs for young women from low-income families, helping others gain the independence that my own family had tried so hard to strip away from me. My mother and sister tried calling me dozens of times during those months, leaving tearful voicemails begging for financial bailouts. But I never answered. Some bridges aren't meant to be repaired after they've been burned. They're meant to remind you of the dangerous places you should never cross back over. Standing on the balcony of our home overlooking the harbor, holding a warm cup of coffee while Julian wrapped his arm around my shoulder, I finally felt at peace. I realized that my family's cruelty was never really about me. It was about their own insecurity and desperate need to feel superior. They thought wealth and status made a person valuable, but in the end, those empty illusions ruined them. True power doesn't come from putting others down or flexing luxury brands you can't afford. It comes from knowing who you are, standing firm in your dignity, and quietly building a life grounded in love, honesty, and self-respect. I didn't need my mother's approval or my sister's praise to be complete. Leaving their toxicity behind was the greatest gift I ever gave myself. Now, I want to ask you, if you were in my shoes, would you have stepped in to save your family from foreclosure after how they treated you, or would you have walked away like I did? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to read your perspectives. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the video on your screen right now for another incredible story that will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until the end, and I'll see you in the next video.